Rich und Ehre, war sich der noch angesäche. So bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic.
This is Matt Pegas.
And this is episode, I'm going to say 17, Matt.
You're right.
I think that's right.
Yep,
This is episode 17 with Caleb Caudell. Did we pronounce the last name right?
It's Caudell.
Caudell. All right.
Yeah, close enough, yeah.
With Caleb, who is an excellent novelist. We just read his novel, The Neighbor, which is kind of from a sort of Midwestern Gothic perspective and style, I would say. But we'll get into that more later. And Caleb, it seems you kind of came onto the scene around April 2020. As did many of us when we found more free time in our lives,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And started a really cool blog, middleamericanlit.wordpress.com. That again is middleamericanlit.wordpress.com. And you started off, I think, with a blog that was a review, or not maybe started, one of your first blogs was a review of Delicious Tacos' novel, Finally Some Good News, which, is another example of kind of this internet fiction, outsider fiction lit that that our mission kind of is to profile at New Right.
Right.
And it seems about a year later, maybe, just correct me if I have the timeline wrong, but I think you published The Neighbor in June of 2021.
Yeah, May, I believe, of 2021. Yeah,
Okay.
Getting close to a year now.
Yeah. So, you started the blog, got a novel out really quickly, and a very good one, I must say. And, and you're here now.
I am here now, yeah.
Take it away, Caleb.
Sure, yeah. I started that blog April 2020, although at the time I was considered an essential worker and was working full time.
Oh, wow.
I believe I was, I've bounced around from job to job, but at the time I was in north central Indiana working in a Walmart distribution center in the freezer section where temperatures were about -30. And
Wow.
I would go in at 4 a.m. and work until about 2 or 3. And I was living with a woman, it's an ex now, my girlfriend at the time, super small town, Upland, Indiana, completely flat, hometown of James Dean. It's a nice area. There are things I like a lot about it. But even though I worked quite a bit, about the only other thing I did was write. And I tend to split up my writing between nonfiction and fiction. I devote about equal time to both, although it can vary. But yeah, I'd like to work on the blog, and then I had this novel going. When I was really in the groove with the novel, I was writing about 2 hours a day. I was trying to get a couple thousand words, roughly 1,000 words per hour, to get that initial draft done. And it was a pretty smooth process. Once I figured out that initial concept, it all flowed very smoothly. And I'd say it probably took me maybe about 6 months to get the first draft done, with some breaks here and there, and then about another 6 months to go through the edits and work with my publisher and go back and forth on that.
1,000 per hour is really good, I have to say. I think I and Matt, to an extent, wrote our novels during a similar time period.
Yeah.
And no, I was shooting for like 1,000 a day. Like if I clocked 1,000 words in a day, I was like, well, that's good progress there.
Yeah,
But,
it depends on the total amount of time you have, your energy levels, what's going on around you, how many distractions you're dealing with. The reason I'd like to try to shoot for about 1,000 an hour is because that's about all the time I could really guarantee myself. Sometimes I would have more time, and then I would go for more or spend some time editing. But I knew that at worst I could only get that much time in. And so that was my bar. And that's also taking into consideration that I'm going to go back, I'm going to edit. I don't really edit much as I write, at least initially.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's an interesting place to start the conversation in terms of craft. It's something I sometimes wish we talked about more on this podcast. Caleb, I'm curious, are you a morning writer? Are you a before work guy, after work guy? I mean, I know some people find these questions kind of banal, but I think I, as a writer, always find it interesting to hear what other people do, and I think probably some of our listeners do too. So, yeah, what's your routine like? Because it sounds like it's working.
Yeah, no, and I'm interested in this as well. I don't consider it banal at all. It's at the heart of things. Without some kind of routine or structure, none of this would even come to fruition. Totally. But ideally, and it can vary because I work quite a bit and I have other things going on, but if I can clear away distractions, I like to write in the morning. I like to write about an hour after waking up. It's not first thing. I need to clear the cobwebs. I've got to rev my engines up a little bit. I like to have a cup of coffee, maybe take a walk, play with the cats a little bit, and maybe read a little bit. I don't want to go too far into the weeds with someone else's material, but maybe even read a couple of poems or something. I'm a big fan of Wallace Stevens. I like Fernando Pessoa. There's bits here and there. Like this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but like the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa is a great book to pick up because it's these disconnected, fragmentary reflections and observations. So it's nice to pick up something like that and just read a paragraph or two.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm going to write that down. I actually remember Pessoa being on one of my college lit syllabi, but I have to admit I didn't crack the book. So.
I highly recommend him. Yeah, if you haven't checked him out yet, you really should. He is a fantastic writer, really beautiful language, super evocative. Very melancholic. Maybe it's almost an indulgence in a way because I tend towards the melancholic and it feeds that. But it's really pretty stuff.
That's an interesting thought to me. I haven't read poetry in years, but based on what you're saying now, it's something I'm going to think about. Because, my routine is similar. I try and write daily about an hour, half hour to an hour after waking up. My move is because I used to grab my phone right when I woke up. I'm trying to stop that. So replace it with a book. So I do read. That's my main thing I do before writing. But the type of reading that I think probably lends itself best to sort of a reading in preparation for writing, it would make sense to me that poetry would be beneficial with regard to that because it clears the cobwebs a bit. It gets you thinking imagistically. As opposed to delving into like a narrative or nonfiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And apart from that, I don't read much poetry, and I don't really care for it most of the time, but I find it useful in that context of stimulating me a little bit. Because I wouldn't want to spend an hour or 2 hours reading poetry. I think that would get extremely tedious for me. But just one or two poems, and that sparks this freer association. I think it aids the creative process. Especially, the mind, I think, is more inclined towards that in the morning anyway.
Yeah. No, I find too.
It's better to write in the morning just because your mind is more uncluttered. Like when I try at the end of the day, so much has happened, so much has work is on my mind, other things are on my mind. I'm not in that creative space. But when you wake up, it's like, you have that zone.
Yeah, and it's crucial to not reach for your phone. Unless, I suppose, if you're a journalist or you're a topical writer, maybe you need to be updating yourself that consistently on what's going on, or you're writing on a topic that's unfolding at a daily rate or something. But otherwise, if you're doing fiction, if you're pulling material from down deeper within yourself or from somewhere else in the universe, I think it's pretty counterproductive to fill your head with a bunch of topical nonsense.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, you've said this, Caleb, and Dan and I both too. You know, we work full time, so like finding that hour before work has really been the sweet spot for me. And, you know, I've tried. I still do sometimes right after work. I've even written during my lunch break. But man, it's that morning time that is
Right.
that I find to be essential. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll squeeze it in later too if I can. But you can tell the difference. Things are fuzzier. You're slower.
I can edit later in the day.
Yeah, editing is a
yeah.
different story.
Right, but that, you know, those 1,000, 2,000 words you're talking about, you know, of pure creative energy, that is by far best in the morning.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe for everyone, it sounds like for us three at least.
Yeah, it's like a
Yeah.
blitzkrieg kind of thing. And especially, if you're not a full-time writer, if you're not paid to write, you don't have 8 to 10 hours a day to lounge around, take walks, write for a while, take a break, go back to it. You've got to condense it. You've got to concentrate it. You've got to find something that allows you to very efficiently produce material.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's impressive to get it down to an hour and just like have an hour of solid productivity
Right.
in an already productive day.
Right.
That is like,
Oh, it feels
I mean,
amazing.
frankly,
Yeah.
I mean, it's why I think there are very few novelists, very few good novelists, because most people just don't have the time.
Right.
And the
They
people
don't have,
who do have the time don't, have anything else
Don't
to
have
do.
this-
and
yeah, don't have the structure.
No.
lives to inform.
and it's almost there's not only the time issue. There's perhaps this is a little bit grandiose or self-aggrandizing or something, but the courage of focus. It's not that hard to find an hour, even if you're very busy. You can carve that time out, but then you have to commit to grappling with your own mind. And
Absolutely.
one of the things about writing, and sometimes the way people talk about this, it gets a little inflated or something, but you are face to face with the limits of your own intelligence right there.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's something you don't really feel up for. And I'm not going to try to act like it's a daily torture or anything, but you do have to renew that effort over and over again.
I mean, it sounds trite, but you can't be afraid to fail.
Right.
You have to, good writing isn't guarded writing. It's not like I'm trying to be great writing.
Yeah.
It's the writing you do that's, the honest writing. And the
Sure.
honest writing is the writing that you do kind of like off the cuff, that you do. You just find that rhythm and you get into it. And then, like when I was writing my novel, it didn't really get good until I found the main character's voice.
That's
and
right.
then when you find the main character, as you seem to have in The Neighbor, there's a very distinct, even though it's in the third person, there's a very distinct kind of character voice for Jesse. And it's, once you find that voice, you're good to go. You're off to the races.
Yeah, and you don't know where that's going to be necessarily right off the bat. And it can get a little discouraging, but you have to be willing to push through that. You have to be willing to look at certain inadequacies and find a way around them, or find ways of incorporating them or making them work for you.
Do you have any good readers for you, like editors?
Yes. One of the I have such a conflicted relationship with Twitter, as I'm sure many people do, and that's probably a commonplace. But I have found through Twitter several people that have been extremely helpful in the feedback that they've offered, not just with the novel, but nonfiction stuff, short stories. I have a couple of people in my real life that I send material to. Yeah, I'm extremely grateful for that, because I don't pay anyone to. As of now, I don't pay anyone to edit my work. I don't pay for anyone's opinion on my work. There are a few people that I'm confident in asking, and I would never expect it either. And I would be totally fine with no one having the time to do it, especially if I'm not paying them. But there are people out there who have devoted at least part of their free time to giving their perspective on things and helping me out with that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
no, there's a good economy, so to speak, of people doing that on Twitter, and it's definitely part of what we're trying to do on the podcast is, give feedback and get help people get their work out there.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm actually curious. Sorry, Dan.
No, go on.
I'm just curious. For some of our readers might be interested. I'm a bit interested. How did you hook up with Bonfire Books, and kind of what is Bonfire Books? It seems like a pretty good, company in general, but I'm just
Yeah.
yeah.
No, they're good guys. They're stand-up guys. I've greatly enjoyed working with them. They are the perfect combination, I think, for me, is someone or like a company or whatever that's both responsive and also that will hang back, that
Hands
won't
off,
that won't put pressure on me, but also will work with me and is communicative. And I know that almost plays into certain flaws that I have, where I'm pretty selfish in that way, where if I want someone's attention, I want it quickly. But then if I don't want to be bothered, I don't want to be bothered. So they work with me on that, and it's nice. They're small scale. They only have a few releases at this point, but that works really well for me. One of the things I don't like about publishing, I guess, is that the time between like submitting a work and then having it accepted and then having it published is like you're talking years down the line. Yeah. And the smaller you go, I guess because I'm not so concerned about hitting it big or making a name for myself necessarily, I want a physical copy of what I'm doing to be available in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And the fewer projects they have, and I hope this also doesn't sound like I'm selling them short or like they don't have enough going on, but it's just nice that they can devote quite a bit of their energy and attention to me. And so the time from agreeing to put out the book to putting it out was breakneck compared to most. Like the pace of that was just so fast, and I really appreciate that because I'm not very patient really when it comes down to things. That.
And the world moves so fast now. Fiction, I think, should be a little bit of a step back from the rush of the world and of social media. But nevertheless, it's the world we're living in moves at such a speed that, like, I mean, can you imagine, like, everything changes so fast. So yeah, that year-long gap between finishing something and getting it published, it's I did do that with my book, and it was fine. But whatever I publish in the future, I'm going to circumvent that because it just isn't fresh anymore.
Yeah, and I think especially for a debut, that was nice. I mean, maybe if you've already got 2 or 3, you've got a catalog or something, and you're working on even longer range projects, maybe you can afford to take that time. But I had reached a point, I had been writing for long enough and putting out things digitally that I wanted a physical copy, and I wanted to have it out in a relatively short amount of time. And and the way that I found Bonfire was that I think, as I recall, it's slightly hazy, but I think at some point in the fall of 2021, I had pretty much finished a first draft, maybe even a second draft, done some edits on the novel, and I tweeted that, hey, I've got a book. Does anyone want to work with me? Does anyone want to put it out? And they got a hold of me, and they were already familiar. They had been reading my blog. It was through the blog that they were made aware of me and were interested enough in putting out the book.
Awesome.
Nice.
They are an Australian company, I think.
Yes, they are Australian. One of them, I believe, is Australian. The other is American and was either born in Indiana or lived in Indiana for a while. We shared certain Indiana references, I know, in talking about things like that. But they are based in Australia.
Interestingly, I had a former professor, because my novel Nutcracker is a little edgy, and as such, it's probably a little difficult to publish in the mainstream publishing industry. And this former professor recommended reaching out to British publishers and British agents, saying that they are a little more, tolerant of things that are, unwoke, shall we say, or what have you. Yeah. And Australia, I wonder if, not that your material is, and we'll get into the novel shortly, but not that it is especially, dissident in any way, but you don't see, this is something we'll get into, you don't see a lot of novels that are, written from the perspective that you write from. So it maybe is something that, Australians or, Brits are more like, hey, I wonder what's going on in the U.S. What's going on with these people?
Yeah, no, there might be that curiosity. Yeah, there might be people who are willing to take a chance on material that doesn't quite fit into that doesn't touch on more mainstream themes or what's considered palatable. I don't know. I'm sure there are I know there are American-based companies that are also willing to do the same thing. It was a right place, right time kind of thing for me. And also, yeah, playing into my maybe laziness in a way of like me just saying, hey, who would be interested? And they said they were. And of course, they turned out to be great to work with. I mean, I wouldn't just go with anything, but that was the start of it. Yeah, I just haven't really tried to. I just haven't been willing to wait for most like bigger American companies. I don't know. I did send some stuff out to other places and didn't hear anything back in a time frame that worked for me. So
yeah,
this
no,
is a really well-produced novel as well. Like the cover art,
they did a great job. Yeah, I mean,
like,
what more could I want? That's the thing. Is like it's completely professional. It exceeds my standards left to my own devices. Who knows what I would accept? Like I don't have visually and materially. I don't consider. I'm not a refined person. I'm really not. So I think like anything that just like a stack of papers I'd probably give the green light on. So that went way beyond what I would have expected.
Makes sense. Yeah, maybe we just jump into it with the the novel. And one of the things I was wondering is your your literary inspirations. What styles influenced The Neighbor, your novel?
Yeah.
It bears there's a sort of quest that the protagonist Jesse is on after an inciting event, and in some respects it's has allusions to classical stories like the Odyssey. I don't know to what extent that was intentional, but it's very much written in the style of the kind of maybe, and tell me if I'm putting words into your mouth here, but the Southern Gothic combination with a little bit of the kind of beat patter, the on the road style.
Yeah, that would not be putting words in my mouth. The major influence, if there's a central influence, it is Southern Gothic. William Faulkner is probably at the heart of things, and then a little like as a descendant of that, Cormac McCarthy, which that's not necessarily Southern Gothic. That's like Appalachian and then Western, but. Those elements are very strong. Those are major influences. On the road, not as much. A little bit. I wasn't as into Kerouac. I haven't read him since like high school-ish era. All of these references, they're knocking around in my head a little bit. But William Faulkner is a big one for sure. The on the road thing, I was thinking about it, but not. Also, maybe taking a step back, I'm not all that academic at this point. And so like when you bring up something like the Odyssey, I did have the idea in a vague sense of doing a reverse Odyssey or an inverted Odyssey, but I never intended to be rigorous with the allusions or to map. I don't necessarily like very intricate or puzzle-like works where it's now you need to be a scholar to uncover. Maybe that can be fun. I'm not necessarily knocking it, but it wasn't my intention. So I wasn't trying to map every location onto, this is where Odysseus was, or this is I wasn't trying to be that clever or erudite with these things, but I did, at least in a general sense, have the idea of like, okay, so there's this classical story about a hero who's been cast out and he needs to make his way home. What if we just flip it on its head? What if someone is running from home? What if the exile is already the birth at the beginning and he's got to get away?
Yeah. No, that sounds very on the mark. And with regard to Faulkner, it's interesting. I didn't actually think of Faulkner as I was reading this, but as you mention it, I remember how wickedly funny some of Faulkner's writing was, and I do
Yeah.
see parallels in. You have some, like really hilarious lines in here. A lot of the television shows that Amber enjoys, which are like
Yeah.
various reality programming about people who eat strange things, like the
Right.
woman who eats Vaseline, and
Yeah.
the various like fast food
Hmm.
concoctions, and
Yeah.
the caffeine candies and shit,
Right. Yeah.
which
The shock rocks, I think was one. Yeah. That's it's all maybe it's fairly lowbrow, but I have a lot of fun riffing on the variations of food products, yeah, candies, sodas, and there is a real point in there. There is something to highlight, and that the kind of the sea of garbage on which we're drifting, all the proliferation of products and things that make us sick, that provide like these very cheap thrills and calories that get us from one day to the next, but are actually poisoning us, and how accessible they are, and yet how inaccessible, like more fulfilling things happen to be at the same time. But yeah, I try to have fun with it. But I, one thing, going back to what you pointed out, the humor of Faulkner is often underrated. That's not often brought up. Like, he is very funny at times, and Cormac McCarthy is a major influence, and he's mostly not funny at all, except for in Suttree, which is like a middle period novel, which is not like his other stuff in some ways. I mean, it's very graphic and gritty, but it's also much funnier than his other stuff, and that's one of the more hidden influences that has been
interesting.
operating on me. Yeah, I'd like to. For me, humor comes from a very sad place. I think like it's based on observing something that's actually very painful when you confront it directly, and then the only way of working through it is by somehow making it comical or finding a way to laugh at it. So the sadness is the basis, or like something very melancholic, and thinking like, well, there are all these people who are pretty much buried in trash, but and without condemning them or mocking them in a completely cruel way, how do we derive some sort of humor or joy out of it? And sometimes the way to do that is through a really frank description.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the only good. Not that this is necessarily in the notes I mentioned this. Not that this is necessarily a satire, but there are elements of dramatic irony when you're describing these wacky snacks that people eat, and
Yeah.
these like crazy TV shows,
Hmm.
and it's very funny.
Yes.
And there's a sense that, like, yes, to an extent, it's a funny situation, but in order to like really do this satire in a way that is effective, you have to really care about the people who you're writing
Yeah.
about. You have to
Right.
care about. So like in my novel, my protagonist that I satired, it was someone who, ultimately I'm like, well, it's a very flawed person, but yeah, I
Hmm.
do have empathy.
Yeah.
And like, if you try to satirize something or that you have disdain for,
Hmm.
then it becomes cruel and just kind of
Yeah.
like a Saturday Night Live skit.
Yeah, it's flat. There's no depth to it. There are no other dimensions. And yeah, it's a good point. You do need some empathy, and I think empathy is in fairly short supply. And and also that's not even I don't think of it as a judgmental statement, but I think naturally as human beings, we don't have as much empathy as we would like to believe. And so some things are probably off limits. We probably just can't treat some subjects or look at some people with the empathy we would like to. Therefore, maybe we can't treat them artistically. I don't know. People have different limits, but yeah, I think even doing satire, you need to be able to relate to it on some level. There needs to be a human connection. And for me, maybe it is a limit to my imagination, but I've grown up in the midst of all of these things. I have seen these things directly. I have had relationships with these kinds of people. And even though I can be very judgmental and I can be very critical of certain choices that they make, I can still see the humanity underneath that. And that's like, as an example of, if I were to view someone watching garbage television and eating a family-sized bag of Funyuns, I can sneer at that, and I can say, well, they're making a bad choice, and I wouldn't make that choice. Not also, I mean, I do make those kinds of choices sometimes too. Anyway, but normally the way we judge things is a matter of frequency or volume, right? It's not like we never do those things. It's just like, well, I don't do it every day or whatever, something like that, where we qualify it. But when I look at somebody who's, maybe their habit is to watch horrible television every day, I can say that's not good for them. They should do something else. I don't do that, but I still see how it's fulfilling. It's some sort of surrogate pleasure, or it's a source of some sort of fulfillment that isn't. It's not getting met somewhere else. Yeah, and I still I really that touches me in a way too, where like part of me wants to mock it, but part of me wants to just give someone a hug or be like, I know exactly why you're doing this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, that empathy really comes across in the novel for, not just the protagonist, but for, I don't think you actually mentioned the state it's set in. We know it's the Midwest. I assumed it was, probably Indiana, where, or, Ohio or what have you. Yeah. But yeah, no, there's that clear empathy for the region and the challenges that it faces. And I was struck particularly by the last line by the cop, and this is not really a spoiler, but he says it's not like it's some tragedy, referring to a specific murder that kicks off the novel. Right. And though like that murder, you could say it is a tragedy, it isn't. It's maybe as it is argued in the book, to some extent, it's good for the community, it's bad for the community, but it misses the point, and intentionally so. This was your intention, I'm sure, to say it's not some tragedy, because the true tragedy is the whole book. Right. It's what happened in the past 30 years to Middle America. Right. And yeah, I mean, what's been your experience with that? And we, maybe have our own.
Yeah, no, I grew up in a small town in Indiana, and when I was born, already we're maybe 10, 15 years into deindustrialization. And some of the effects of that were not developed until, it wasn't until even about around the year 2000 or so, early 2000s, that most of the factories in my small town and surrounding areas were closed down. But the beginnings of it, I think you trace back to the 70s. And going back even farther, I find it extremely interesting how going from rapid industrialization, the post-war boom, to deindustrialization happened within about 1 or 2 generations. Yeah, it's an incredibly swift process. I think that gets overlooked a little bit because, especially if you think of like the 50s, post-war boom, prosperity, mass production, mass consumerism, you got the expansion of the middle class. From about that, like 1945, then to 1975, 25, 35 years, that's a period from expansion to contraction. That's from like government policies that support the middle class to policies that counteract all of that. Yeah. And that's not really enough time there's no time in that for traditions to arise. That's not time for wisdom to be passed down. That's like suddenly, you don't need to be educated to make a decent living, to even as an educated person, you will not make a decent living.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. I mean, it's now been in decline, so to speak, for as long, or I guess longer than it was booming. Right.
Yeah, the boom was incredibly rapid, and I'm sure it took everyone by surprise. But it's so funny how that brief period of a boom with suburbanization, greater urbanization, all of that industrial development, that is looked back on now as a period of conformity and stasis. But it was a time of incredible sweeping change.
Absolutely.
And it was a blink of an eye. But now, but what that says to me is that things have declined so much in some ways, and that the change has only accelerated, and things have become so much more chaotic, that period itself now looks like some sort of static paradise.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I think not to get too political, and I don't even mean this politically. I mean more just in the way that people think about these things and the images that are conveyed. Maybe it's too simplistic, but if you look at, Trump's 2016 victory, Make America Great Again, whatever, what did that mean? Who knows? But I do think, in terms of what the states that he did win, and again, I'm really not even trying to make some political argument here. I'm just kind of spitballing. Those Rust Belt states that he did win, it's tempting to think that what did Make America Great Again mean to those Trump voters? It's harkening back to that time. And, that was part of his promise as well. Whether we fulfilled on it, we don't even need to comment on, but yeah.
Sure, yeah, no, and from the generation, my dad's generation to my own, my dad was able to, without a college education, work in a limestone plant and make very good money. And he had great benefits. He worked hard. It was a hard job. By no means was it something he just showed up and goofed around on. But it was a hard job, but he was compensated well for it with no special certification. It wasn't a lifelong training process. From that to my own generation, where I received much more extensive schooling. And of course, I made my own choices. I don't want to suggest that I couldn't have made better choices, but it just wasn't as simple. It wasn't as direct of a line of just, if you go through school and you get a degree, you're going to get a good job. No, things have fallen off.
Yeah. Because you can't get a good job. You can't have a job that supports a family. That's the big difference. Is right. As you said, policies, economic circumstances, even that supported the middle class versus what we have now.
Yeah, the middle class is contracting now, and what you had for a very brief period of time was economic policy that was intended to support the average man or the average family, to allow for a decent, comfortable way of life. Of course, there are obligations that have to be fulfilled on the end of the middle class person, or the man, or the family. You still can't be a complete fuck up. You have to show up to work. You have to work hard. You have to be productive and industrious and sober enough. But if you fulfill your end, then you will reap the benefits of that. It was set up that way. What we have now, and what has been going on, and this I think is, sorry to say, but probably only getting worse, is a system that is designed to only appeal to a much smaller class of more ruthless, maybe even amoral, striving, energetic, individualistic types who are better at manipulating and seeing advantages in a more particular way. Like, it's not just about, go to work, you'll be taken care of, you'll be able to support people.
Very few of whom are even in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And it's, as we all know, in the past 30 years or so, since NAFTA and even before, all of the, the profits have been accruing to the coasts, to the big cities.
Yeah.
And, not to get too personal, but my grandparents are from upstate New York. My father's from there. And I remember going up in the 90s for Christmas as a child, and as a kid you don't really see the world the way adults do, but I'm pretty sure the communities seem pretty strong, relatively speaking, it seems. Yeah. And now as an adult, when I go back, it's just, it's like the community you describe in this, in The Neighbor. Mm-hmm. And, it's obvious that the opioid crisis has hit upstate New York, as it has hit many other areas of the country. Right. And it's obvious that, the living wages, NAFTA and all these, and this deindustrialization, this shipping of industry to China, has left this region with, like very few economic opportunities. I mean, you have in this novel Jesse as a dishwasher. And not even a dishwasher who like is like, with other dishwasher, but he's like a machine gives him his dishes.
Yeah.
And that I thought that was a very nice touch, but it's also a touch that comes from reality. This is how it is in, many of these kind of like franchise kitchens. And that's just not a life that lends itself to creating a strong community, which does not lend itself to, I'm going to be cute here, to having good neighbors.
No, not at all. Work is hard no matter what. No matter what you're doing, you're going to be dealing with drudgery. You're going to be dealing with repetition, and it's going to take a toll on you physically and mentally. But what offsets that, or what should, is that embeddedness in a community and that sense of feeling socially useful, and that sense of being loved, and that capacity to love others. But a lot of that gets stripped away because the work, some of that only arises through permanence or through stability of environments. And when you have population churn, when you have all of these populations moving very rapidly, you've got people, I don't know how many, I forget the statistic on this, but like Americans move a ridiculous number of times throughout their lives. It's like 7 or 8 or something like that, or maybe even more. That's a lot of movement. And with that much movement, you can't really establish roots. You can't really get to know people. And if you don't know the people around you, then what you do matters less, because a lot of the times what you do in itself is not really, it can't be that fulfilling. It's repetition. You have to do the same thing day in and out. But if you know you're providing for someone, if you know that you are providing a service to people around you that you get to know on a more solid basis, that can make all that easier to bear. But if it's just another job that you work for a while and then you're going to get kicked out, or you're going to have to move somewhere else, and everything is churning and swirling around you, it's much more difficult to endure those conditions.
Yeah. Well, part of what came to mind in what you said about the way, society is now structured toward a more narcissistic, striver, atomized class of people is interesting, because the sort of economic boom of the Midwest that we were talking about earlier, you might say, and I'm not an economist, but you might say that it was structured around the family and more broadly the community. That was what was incentivized. So there was a meaning to the work. Right. Now the kind of work that's more incentivized is this narcissistic email job, Uber Eats class.
Right. If you're not, that's the thing. That's exactly it. The economic policies at one time were geared towards supporting families and individuals who didn't want to stand out in themselves, but who wanted to be able to provide for others and provide stability. But now it's much more a matter of standing out and distinguishing yourself, often in ways which are probably antisocial or disruptive.
Completely, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously that leads to the erosion of community. And that leads to, in some respects, and I'm sure this was intentional, as you're reading The Neighbor, you think, God, if Jesse had been born 50 years earlier, none of this would have happened. Right. He'd have a plant job, he'd make a good living, he and Amber would have children. I don't know to what extent you're comfortable giving away spoilers. But
we can talk about whatever. I don't necessarily care all that much. Yeah, it's up to you on that.
Okay, so yeah, it's it goes awry, and in a very moving and tragic passage, Amber overdoses, and but this is the reason for this, to some extent, is that he lives next to a drug dealer who she buys the drugs from.
Yeah, so happened to live there. It's accidental, it's chaotic, but they're caught up in that. And I think of that all the time. I see people who, one of the things that happen when you have a society that reaches a certain level of complexity, it's meritocratic in some ways, and you raise the bar on intelligence, and you set up a system where you can only prosper if you know how to game the system. If you're clever enough in a very superficial way to take advantage of certain opportunities. But if you're not, what happens is you overvalue intelligence, and you fail to see the dignity in people who simply are not as superficially clever. And what you end up with, though, is you deprive people of dignity. Because you shouldn't have to be that smart. You shouldn't have to scheme that hard, right? Because like if someone comes into my shop, when you work in a boutique coffee shop, you get the highest and the lowest. You get people you get yoga instructors and people on trust funds, but you also get hobos. You get street people, and so you'll see people come in. See a guy he's listening to a rap song on his phone with no headphones, and he's eating from a bag of Cheetos. And I look at that and I can't help but think that this is a person who just doesn't have the firmament. They don't have the capacity.
Social acumen.
Yeah, they can't. They would have been fine, and they could have worked in a mill. They could have been on a farm. There were all these other forms of socially useful labor that they could have picked up, and they could have been useful contributing members to. But now, all the influences they're subjected to, they just can't handle it. They can't discipline themselves in a way that works for them, and so now they're reduced to something that they wouldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah, the lack of socially useful labor, I think that's important.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Because now it's like there's such a hole in the center of that, and so what that leaves is only people who are very creative. And creative is it's an ambivalent term. It's not inherently a good thing. Like being, it's really not. And so what that leaves open is like people who are like, I don't actually have anything to contribute that's beneficial or that improves like the health of people or that does anything substantial. But I can insinuate inadequacies in people. I know how, like I can game the system. I know how to manipulate. There's a certain intelligence in that. It rewards a kind of manipulative intelligence, and if you don't have it, you're increasingly like without resources.
Yeah. Even on the highest levels, like I have a friend who's a banker, and his job is to enter into deals, agreements, knowing that his counterparty, the bank's counterparty, will default, and then screw them with the penalties. Mm-hmm. And and this is just like, this is his job. This is what he does for a living. Right. And like he's winning when his deal partners are losing. And to an extent, there's always that dynamic in a deal. You want to get, like Matt and I come from the business side of the entertainment industry, and like you want to get the best deal. You want to get but like there's something different when what you want is literally to cause your counterparty to fail. Yes. And that's just like so much of the financial crisis, so much of what we've seen involves that type of dynamic where you're trying to screw the other person.
Yes, right. You have it's rapacity. It is really ramped up, and I don't think that is conducive to healthy relationships. I think that only reinforces that kind of atomized striving, and people double down on the strategies for figuring out ways to maximize their own gains and profits. You see it even in I don't know, we're all probably a little bit red pill or like manosphere adjacent to, and the way that like the fucking advice industry of like basically inculcating insecurity into you to the point where you feel like you can't do anything and you have to pay someone to give you basic life advice. like, oh, you don't know how to meet women. You're a loser. You don't have money. You're all alone. Buy my course.
Oh,
I'll teach you how to. But that's all of their. They have no product. They have no expertise apart from appearing as an expert in something.
Right. I mean, we did our second podcast on the old blog Chateau Artiste. Whether or not you're familiar with that,
I am. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that was, there's interesting stuff. That was a free blog. That was just a blogger writing and had some interesting takes. But some of that stuff is interesting. But I pretty much detest, the grifter, shall we say. It's part and parcel of what we're talking about, which is that kind of taking advantage of people. And I mean, the world. Now, I live in California. Obviously, it's not just a California issue. It's everywhere. You can find all the scams online, overt scams, and even more subtle ways people have of getting you to fork money over. It's just such a kind of disgusting industry of people trying to figure out ways to get you to buy into them. Like, I need this, and
it's always you'll notice that it seems that no matter what, it has to move in the direction of individualizing you to a pathological degree. It's separating you from why is it so often like you need to break up with your girlfriend? Your wife's a bitch. You don't really like, you're a submissive, you're a beta male, so you need to change your life, but I'm going to show you how to do it. You got to pay me to do it. It pretty much always operates through severing of ties. And we see that on our end of things, but it happens over in the liberal sphere as well. It's a little bit more overtly political with, you got to cut out your family if they voted for Trump or something. But it's just so much advice. Really, it homes in way too much on individual preference, and it only furthers social disintegration. It's all about, well, not all of my own individual needs are getting met. So who can I cut out of my life? How can I recreate myself in a way that allows for greater flourishing? But you're actually isolating yourself, and you're paying people, you're allowing people to profit off of that isolation.
And it would never happen in a healthier society.
None of this would be necessary.
Yeah, in a healthier society, all of these men in these how to get a girlfriend boot camps would have girlfriends, because we would just live in a society where people went to work and had good jobs and felt good forming families, and were into reading blogs about how do I become the ultimate alpha male, and the women reading blogs how do you identify whether your boyfriend is a secret loser?
Right, no, totally. And the self-love thing too, that, I think about that quite a bit, the prevalence of that discourse of how we think that we've made this advance where you need to love yourself. How can you love someone else if you don't love yourself? But I think it's completely ass backwards. You actually you can only love yourself if you are capable of loving other people, and you need other people to love you too. You can't just sit in a fortress and do mantras and meditate. I don't know. I don't really subscribe to that stuff.
No, I hear you. Yeah, and all of this is to say, we talked earlier, and we're getting into a topic which could be the stuff of a multi-volume work of how society came to be the way it is, and the ultimate political manifesto. We're getting deep, but
I guess there's a book in there somewhere. But
I'm sure, maybe many, but that it's not. Yeah, we talked about economic policies, favoring the family and favoring the middle class versus economic policies that now don't. But it's not just economic policies; it's also this social revolution that's happened basically since the 60s, which that's the
it's cultural messaging.
And it has to do with atomization and individualism. And how do we think our way out of this? I don't know, but
I don't have answers. I don't have anything prescriptive really, but I do notice certain trends, and I don't like where things are going. And I guess what I'm very sensitive to is the way that attempts to ameliorate some of the negative conditions or the damage that has been done only exacerbates it. Like I said, and a perfect example is self-love discourse. So what this is intended to do is to protect you from the ravages of other people's decisions and other people's selfishness and the getting in and out of relationships. But I think that subscribing to this way of life or philosophy, identifying with it too strongly, only intensifies the problem. It's more of a symptom rather. It's not the solution. The solution to getting hurt and not being able to trust people is not armoring yourself to the extent that no one can hurt you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, to draw from your book what the solution seems to have been for Jesse, interestingly, it's not a solution really. He just finds another job.
Yeah, right.
But that in and of itself is kind of the solution. There is no solution.
Right.
The
it's
solution
the best.
is you just got to keep working.
Right. And that's going almost back to On the Road. I think there was a point I wanted to make on how that book was written in a time where there was this perception of mass culture and conformity to one standardized way of life. And so the road represented an escape from that. There were these outcasts who didn't want to fit into working 9 to 5, supporting a family, going to work, consuming. They hit the road, they fucked around a lot. But at this point, now reaching this later stage of deindustrialization, one of the points I wanted to make is that, in contrast, the road is no longer an escape. The road leads back to where you were, because you're going to find the same problems everywhere. Like globalization, in a way, if it supposedly offers opportunity everywhere, it also puts up roadblocks everywhere. The same problems will meet you wherever you go. So, if you leave home, what you'll find are the same issues. So there is no escape, and that sounds incredibly bleak. But there's a way of turning that around too, which is that you actually don't need to worry about escaping either.
Yeah. You have to find some other turn. I'm just speaking. This is a abstract point. I don't know what I've even been saying here, but you have to turn to something else. Besides, it's not.
Yeah.
There is something liberating about that. You can kiss your fear of missing out goodbye because you're not.
You're really not missing out.
This is all we've got.
Yeah, right.
We're making a podcast on Zoom. This is about as good as it gets.
Yeah, you can hit the road, but you're going to have to get a job again, and you're going to have to enter into relationships. And unfortunately, that the neoliberal program it's up to you. Like whether a relationship succeeds or fails now, and for better and worse, I think mostly for the worse, but it's going to come down to the decisions you make, because there is no community, there is no social support structure that will hold you in place.
Absolutely.
People are not, if you keep fucking up, and if you can't tell yourself internally that, no, I need to maintain this bond, nobody is going to do it for you.
Yeah.
And I mostly consider that a negative. I mean, I'm sure you could argue the other way around. And yeah, of course, throughout history, people have been under these insane obligations and have been forced to do all kinds of things they didn't want to do and probably should have never been made to do. But the problem that we face now on the total opposite end is, even if you have something good, you can fuck it up all on your own and no one's going to stop you.
Oh yeah, no, it's there's no checks and balances, there's no community of people to, I mean, some people do have that and good for them, but a lot of
here
us,
and there, but speaking generally.
Yeah, there's no broader community to enforce the norms of, frankly, getting married and having children.
Right. No.
And that is something that, I think you're probably a millennial as well, Caleb. I think we span the gamut here. Matt is a younger millennial. I'm a middle. And our generation is just so many are going to, frankly, die childless.
Yes,
and
right.
That's, it's very sad because, as my parents are getting older now, it really, dawns upon me, it's very good that I'm there, because if I weren't, God, who would take care of them? No one. They'd be out, all, and that's what's going to happen to many of our peers.
Yeah.
Frankly, to me, if I don't get working,
no, and me too. And one thing that I notice is like one thing that to me seems characteristic of the millennials, or maybe just people in general now, is that they, on the surface, are highly critical and judgmental of other people's choices, but underneath that, there is a very deep apathy. No one actually gives a shit what you do. When you sure, like on the internet, we all want to make incendiary comments, and we all want to draw attention to ourselves by pointing out flaws in other people, but really, no one fucking cares what you do. So, like, whether or not you have children, whether or not you get married, whether or not you fuck up the love of your life, no one fucking cares. No one's going to stop. No one's going to intervene. No one's going to prevent you from fucking up your life. So you need to have your head on straight when it comes to things like that. Because seriously, you could tell one way or the other. You could say, I swear, like the average person, like your acquaintances, people that you know, you could tell them on one end, I'm getting married in 2 months, or I'm getting divorced. They're shrugging their shoulders either way.
Oh, geez. I think you're right.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. No, because, marriage and children is one of the things we're talking about here. A lot of things in life that involve some degree of responsibility and taking on responsibility, and crucially, I think, limiting your horizons, limiting possibilities. Because you hear this kind of dialogue about how millennials, by their own fault or simply by the way the society they are brought up in, there's this fear of cutting out possibilities.
Yes. Right.
And basically, human beings are such that the fear of entering into that responsibility and cutting off all those other possibilities, human beings are such that we're afraid of that. So what a good functioning society and community has is, sometimes it's just raw incentives. Maybe it's even economic incentives. And also, maybe even more importantly, it's a social traditions and social wisdom passed down. So it's like, well, you should do this. You should get married. You should build a family. You should do this and that or the other thing. You should build a career. It's not even just about marriage and children. A good functioning community has within it a sort of breadcrumb trail for people to follow into flourishing. But what we do not have, in society as it is now, it's just apathy. Yes. So it's not enough. No one's going to say don't. I mean, there's a certain contingent within the culture that says don't get married, don't have kids because it's bad for the environment. Screw that. But even without that, just the lack of positive feedback is enough to create the atomization.
Right. And the judgment that people still feel and that people talk about a lot, it's all discursive. It is no deeper than that. It's a lot of chatter. But you can always find a judgmental asshole on the internet who will judge you for your choices and tell you that you're doing the wrong thing. But what I'm talking about is the fact that there are no actual organic pillars around you that are going to make sure that you do the right thing or not.
Yeah, no, this resonates with me a lot. I mean, I'll get personal too. Some of this is somewhat doxable info, but I don't really care that much about that. And I'm more interested in just having an honest conversation. Like I grew up on the East Coast. I was born in Syracuse, New York, which kind of, as Dan was saying, a little bit of that Rust Belt feel. And I won't tell my whole life story or anything, but basically I moved to the West Coast. I live in LA now after college, which I don't regret that move. But it puts me in this interesting position where I moved away from my, I have a great relationship with my family. It's not like I was running away or anything, but I moved away from my family, from the people I knew, to kind of explore something new out on the West Coast. And now I'm in this position in life where I have laid down roots where I am now. But it's like in the back of my head, I know I could just there's not that support system there. Like I could move, and I don't want to think that way, and I'm not saying I do, and I'm not cheapening the life that I've built for myself here. Yeah. But it's the weird thing. I'm 27, and it's like I'm entering my kind of later 20s, and it becomes this weird thing where it's like this anxiety of freedom, almost, to put it, as like a Kierkegaard might, where it's like I could fucking drive away tomorrow, and go off and try and start a life in some other state. And I have that, and I think as a guy too, you're often thinking this kind of thing. As men, there's always this drive to find out what else is out there. But I also think what you said earlier is right, in that all roads kind of lead to the same place. So I say that not to say anything bad about my life, because I'm basically happy, but like nevertheless, I'm often kind of think about the peculiarity of this historical circumstances of my life that have led me to this place where it's like I could fucking do anything I want, and I don't like that. Right?
No, there are downsides to that, and I think only the benefits have been touted. I think that's what's highlighted, is that you should be free to do whatever you want at all times. Okay, there are certain upsides to that, but it's not all good. And in my own life, I'm a 35-year-old man. I am, according to the census, single, as in I'm not married. I have no children. I'm telling you, not in any circumstance, I am never asked if I'm going to get married. There's no, from my family, from friends, no one expects it. And maybe that is, I'm sure that's not everyone's experience. I'm sure depending on, certain places where you grow up, maybe there's still some of that pressure. Maybe if you have more of a religious background, I'm sure that still happens. But a lot of people would like to construe that as a purely positive thing. Like, oh, you're free. No one expects you to do anything. But I'm telling you, it's a little unsettling. Because now I'm like, what? How am I actually viewed by society? Like, what do people actually think of me? Am I just an adult child? Because no one just assumes, he's going to take on greater responsibility. He's going to be responsible for bringing up another generation. No, he's just a consumer. He just does what he wants. No one thinks he's going to do. It's not exactly an inspiring condition.
Yeah, no,
and
it's
the
like
thing is that lack of pressure is bad for you.
Yes.
For the people who, already, benefit from you being here, the people that you would take care of, the people, it would be nice, I'm sure, from those perspectives for you to have a wife and kids. But, essentially you can still fulfill your role. You can still do what you're supposed to do. But the pressure to form a family, that's for you. That's for you to get your act together, so you do not you personally, but all of us. I'm in the same situation. It's we missed out on that pressure living in a kind of post-industrial, Tinderized society.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, and some people still made that choice. Of course, like there are still people who formed families early on. I think. My assumption is that the more religiously steeped your background, the more likely that is. But some of it is even economic. Like marriage is becoming a status marker too.
Yeah, it's expensive. I mean, even just the bare trappings of it. Like I have a friend who got married he flew to Vegas to get married, but it wasn't. It was just him and his wife and family. But I mean, just that in and of itself, the ceremony, you've got to get a ring. It's, it's expensive.
Right. Yeah. Two things that I wanted to be conspicuously absent in the novel and in The Neighbor were religion and family. And especially the family one, I think, is more obvious because there's really no connection to parents, brothers, sisters. That's all supposed to be completely vague, nebulous. The condition is so atomized, and Jesse has Amber, and they have each other, but the two of them are not enough, not in those conditions. So of course they fall apart. But the other thing is that oftentimes there's this association with lower class and religion. Uneducated people, ignorant people are more religious. and maybe that sociologically that bears out in a way, but I think what I've even seen, especially in urban underclasses, is that there's an absence of religion there too. These are not like pious, simple people. Like there's a serious lack of religious faith there too.
Oh yeah.
Like there's pretty much no mention of people do not attend church. They do not even attempt to adhere to religious precepts.
Yeah, no, I've noticed the same thing. I think there is something, maybe in generations past, something to the and definitely like globally, sociologically, less sort of successful or intelligent, whatever people are going to cleave. It sounds negative, cleave to religion more. But I've noticed that too in kind of like there's an increasing lack of religion amongst the kind of lower classes, for lack of a better term, or the religion that is there is not what it once was. I mean, there's obviously, we talked about grifters earlier. There's plenty of that goes on too. Just kind of like BS, not like traditionalist religion, but rather like individualistic, religion, where the incentive is, basically to bring money in. There's a cheapening to it, as I guess what I'm trying to say. I think in generations past, and I can probably still now, there is a great religiousness among, the kind of the common man, but I think even that, very sadly, is cheapening. From my perspective.
I wanted to show that in the book too, and maybe it's going a little farther down the line. Maybe it's not even necessarily a representative picture of where we are right now, but of where we're going or where you can end up. Because if you have this class of people who no longer has social or economic opportunity, and you also deprive them of religious faith and social meaning, then all they really have left are addictions and self-destructive cycles.
Or at least the family-sized Funyuns and 90 Day Fiancé.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No, but that too, though, as you said earlier, that is, it's not as bad as opioids, but it's like...
Yeah, it's on the spectrum.
Yeah, it's on the spectrum, exactly.
And then when tragedy inevitably strikes in those type of circumstances, that's when you most need God. That's when you most need belief and faith. And so that's one of the reasons why that passage where when Amber overdoses is just so stirring, so striking, because like you're in Jesse's head and you know that like now that she's dead, he has nothing.
That's right.
He doesn't have his faith. He doesn't have, belief in anything else. The only thing that he cared about is just gone. And so that was a very powerful passage, I must say.
Yeah, it's supposed to be about as stark as can possibly be, right? Because there is no other support. There's no comfort anywhere else. They were all they had. She was all he had, and now that's gone. And I wanted, and part of why there's one chapter that I wrote where I really did try in a very sensitive and sincere way to paint a romantic picture of two people getting to know each other and falling in love with each other. And that I had to do that to provide that contrast with the deprivation, with the loss that occurs later.
Yeah.
Because it's not all there are moments of beauty, even in a life that squalid and sordid. That's the reason it hurts so much. The loss hurts so much is because there were glimpses, there were moments of transcendence or evolution out of that.
Yeah, I mean, crucially, before they move next to the drug dealer, before they move next to Ace, and if you live in that type of community, I mean, I think there's a sense in the novel that eventually, even though Jesse throughout the novel is always trying to do the right thing, always trying to like clean up the counters or make the right decisions, is trying to take them out for ice cream instead of staying in and smoking weed. But regardless, it'll catch up with you just because like it can't not when you live next to a drug dealer, when you're like, working a deadening job. It's just like, everything was stacked against him.
Oh yeah. There's no countervailing influence whatsoever. Yeah, and there are impulses against it coming from the individual, but they're not going to be strong enough.
Yeah. And you could see how generations prior, those impulses in Jesse are good.
Right.
And like there's no way Jesse would have, been a murderer. He
Yes.
he would have, worked a job and had a family and everything, but the circumstances in some respects make the man. And
Absolutely.
that's what happened. Well, maybe that's a good note to just transition on and talk about what is the next step for you right now. Are you working on anything else?
Yeah, right now I'm semi-consistently always working on nonfiction. I have been playing with the idea of doing a nonfiction collection.
Yes.
I'm not sure how well that works because I always release that stuff online and it's freely available. So I don't know if that's strange or economically silly to put out a product that is freely available.
I want to say I hadn't checked out your blog before like this morning, but I checked it out this morning, and yeah, it's really good stuff. I like it a lot. It's not. I don't want to compare you to Delicious Tacos because it's really not. But you're writing nonfiction, but I do think it could be described as, and I don't even like this word very much, but I notice it kicking around a lot. It could be described as autofiction. I mean,
Yes.
you're not writing philosophy essays. You're writing very honestly and very entertainingly. My relationship with reading your blog is like, I read like One Piece and a little bit of a couple others, but I enjoyed it a lot. I think I read the one you posted like 4 days ago, I think.
Yeah, I talk about, I saw
about
Eternal
Cormac
Sun.
McCarthy.
Okay, yes.
Maybe that was, yeah.
That's one back, I think. There's one more
Yeah, one
recently.
back. There's one more recent,
Mm-hmm.
and that was I saw the Cormac McCarthy thing, and I was like, Anyway, I just want to say it's good stuff, and that people should check it out. And, I'm in a similar position. I wrote a debut novel that came out last year, and I'm working on, whatever I publish next. I'm thinking of doing some combination of sort of nonfiction / autofiction, and as well as like some short stories. I'm in a similar position. I get what you're saying, where there's a temptation. You want to post that stuff kind of for free because you want to bring in more readers. I think there's probably a balance to be found where you make sure you publish some original material that you can only get in the book.
Right.
Maybe you can always go back and sort of put like entire pieces or like halves of pieces behind a log. I think there's something to be done there. Because the work is definitely good. Yeah.
Well, and I play a game with myself a little bit when it comes to the nonfiction, and I'm aware of it, although it does help. I tell myself, when it comes to the blog, when it comes to the nonfiction, I tell myself that this isn't your real work. This is something to put out for free to establish a link to yourself that anyone can check out with no investment. It's you click, you read. I'm not going to put out trash, but also I'm not necessarily. It's not published. It's not. There's no physical copy. I'm not going to put quite the same work. I'm not going to put quite the same attention or energy or focus into it. But at the same time, I'm not just going to put out total garbage. I'm still going to. There's going to be a minimum standard there. So I play a little bit of a game myself where I say, this is cool, but it's not really what I'm doing. But what the interesting thing that I've found is that for as unpopular, as like little popularity as I have, a lot of people who have read the fiction stuff, read the short stories, read the novel, and as much as they like that, like they really enjoy the nonfiction stuff. And I've been encouraged to publish it.
Yeah, I saw that. I was going through your Twitter feed, and you posted a poll like, which should I publish next, fiction or nonfiction? And I think nonfiction went out, and you had a couple comments that were like, nonfiction.
Yeah.
That could get into a whole other discussion. I think that a lot of people are almost more interested in nonfiction today than fiction, which is a little sad, but
in some ways, yeah, and maybe that would be bowing to even in the most reduced form, like a certain market pressure in a way. But I think I get it too. I think there is something. If you're honest, you're relatable.
Right.
And not even based on the particulars of your life, but just the fact that you are a real voice. I think people identify with that they enjoy that, even if it's not, oh, I don't know what it's like to live your exact life, or I wouldn't make the choices you make. They want to hear a real voice. They don't want to. It's just easy. You know when someone is trying to placate a large amorphous group, and so when
in the times as atomized as they are, I think there's a real hunger to relate to people on a deep level. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that makes Delicious Tacos' writing so popular and so good. Is like he writes about stuff, and again, I think autofiction's the word, because not to get too pomo-y about this because I hate that shit, but like the binary between fiction and nonfiction can disappear a little bit when you're writing just honestly. You know, the best fiction is a little bit autobiographical. The best autobiography is a little bit fictional or a little bit stylized, at least.
100%.
So I think that there's a real hunger for that because there is such a premium on, I like Cormac McCarthy, and I like, even some genre stuff. I like to be swept away by a story, but I think first and foremost when I'm reading, I do want to find that nourishment of human connection.
Right.
And I think that,
that's why I am compelled to maybe focus a little bit more on the nonfiction, and even like Friends. And this gets into a delicate thing. The most recent piece I wrote, it's about a few different things. I pretty much, my shtick, if there is one, or my program is to pretty much always zoom in and zoom out. Like I focus in on concrete details of my particular life, and then I zoom way out and look at broad trends, and I try to tie them together in some way.
Yeah.
And I think that's very relatable. I think it's entertaining in a way, and I'm pretty gritty, and I'd like to think funny at times. Like sometimes I think a lot of what is construed as bleak or depressing for me is just funny. Like that's the way I see things, is like I'm just trying to be funny, and then like the major interpretation is like, man, that was fucking sad. That was, but like that was just my way of making something humorous, like exaggerating something or drawing attention to a certain detail. But yeah, I think that is that's in a way very easy to digest, and especially with the way our attention spans work, you've got shorter pieces, you've got 1,000-word pieces, where you're talking about seeing a movie and walking through like a muddy sidewalk, but then also relationships breaking apart on a mass scale, and finding a way to condense all that material into like 1,200 words, 1,500 words. There's something that's very appealing about that, and it's fun to do too. And like you don't have to invest so much. It's not like, okay, I've got a 500-page novel about all of these really intricate plots and.
Well, Tacos has a great line, and I'm not sure exactly which podcast this was on. Matt's heard it. You've probably heard it too. Someone asks him, how do you get famous for being a novelist? And he said, by getting famous for doing something else.
Yeah.
And, And so, it's in this attention economy, you need a blog.
Right.
You need a podcast.
Yeah, right.
You need to get famous somehow, and then people will be like, "Oh, I know this person.
Yeah,
I follow him. Yeah, let me see what he wrote.
He's an interesting voice. He has interesting experiences. He's funny. He's relatable. Yeah, what else is he doing? Right. You can't just drop a 600-page novel from the clouds of heaven onto the earth, and like people approach it like the monkeys in like Planet of the Apes with a monolith or something. Like no one cares.
Especially not if you're outside the publishing industry.
Yeah,
if you're, your Simon & Schuster publishes your work, and they get you on NPR. Like people are gonna notice. Maybe not people on our side of Twitter, because we don't read that junk. But other people will. Yeah. But if if you're your own publicist, you got to publicize yourself.
Right, yeah, you do, yeah. Yeah, that's going back a little bit. The Delicious Tacos reference is one thing. I'm surprised maybe it's a good thing, but I'm surprised that doesn't come up more often, because it's like an open secret, at least for me, that he is a major influence. And I don't want to tout it too much, but it's something that I almost fear at times, where I think what I'm doing is going to be seen as derivative. And not that we don't really have, in some ways we're a little too similar, and in other ways we're very, very different. But even sometimes, like stylistically or with the voice, like I have been very influenced by that. I started reading him when he first started his blog. I was 25.
Oh, damn!
Wow. I was 25. Yeah. He was 35.
You're an OG.
And it's 10 years later. It's 10 years later, and I don't know. It's played out about as you would expect, probably. But I've made comments on there before, and there's that little part of me that is hoping that at some point he will promote what I'm doing. Yeah. You know,
have you interacted with him in the past?
A little bit. Yeah, I sent him an email. He was a very I sent him a link to the review I wrote of his book, and he was very complimentary. Like, he seems like a gracious guy. I would never. Yeah. Like, my attitude towards this sort of thing is, I would never expect anybody to go out of their way to do anything for me like that, because also I don't really do that much for people. I don't. I mean, I maybe would in certain circumstances, but I guess I just don't have that general attitude of like, who needs help? Can I help them? Yeah. Who's going to help me? No, I'm aloof. I'm kind of selfish. I'm distracted easily, but I still have a little bit of that fantasy of like, maybe at some point he'll notice what I'm doing and he'll promote it a little bit, not in some sustained way, but even just like a mention or something. Or it would be a nice thing.
We're trying to get Tacos on the podcast now, and I don't take it. You know, he's definitely a busy guy, but at some point, and we'll bring you up when he comes on. Like, it's good to keep the connections going, right? And I think it's really cool that you. I mean, if I were, I don't know, maybe my sense of this is wrong, and I'm younger, or whatever. But the fact that you've been reading his blog for so long is pretty striking, because he got a lot more sort of well known, like 2-3 years ago.
Right. He got way more popular, but he has been so consistent, though, is the thing, and he was so enjoyable to read way back. Well, one of the things I liked about him so much is that, he was adjacent to Manosphere, Red Pill, that kind of like the advice industry material. And even a lot of the political stuff, like even around the time, because Hartiste was writing at the Chateau, and there was a shift from, he always did game, but at some point, I don't know when this was exactly, there was a shift from game dominant to politics, and it started talking about much more dissident, much more, the game stuff's unacceptable too, also to mainstream society, but he went way farther with
Hartiste, right?
Yeah, Hartiste.
He's crazy.
But what I liked about Delicious Tacos is that he always stayed true to his voice. Like, he didn't join a movement. It was never, like, he was friendly just by virtue of being maybe associated or having some overlap on a Venn diagram. But it was never about taking sides. It was never about saying, yes, I'm a part of this movement. Now you have to agree with what I'm saying. I'm not going to moderate. I'm not going to police things. There's no ideological conformity. There was something just so human about what he was doing that, sure, of course, his sentiments and his outlook would be very offensive to some people. But that was never really the point. It was never. Right. It was
he's a writer.
Right. He's a writer first and foremost. And that's something that I always found very inspiring. And it's not that I wanted to copy exactly what he was saying, but I always took that to heart, and I always kept that in mind, that you're going to say things that will offend people. You're going to take stances, but you have to do it from a very human place and from something that's true for you. And that's going to, some people who are very ideological and just need the repetition of mantras and slogans, they're not going to like that. But I don't know, the way I look at things really is like, I'm not a leftist, I'm not a liberal, I don't identify with any of that, but I still, even with that being said, even though there are many of my views that would get me in a lot of trouble if the wrong people knew too much about it, I still would hope that I could write things that would touch those people.
Yeah.
Like the point of me writing is not like, how could I piss them off? How can I how can I own the libs or something? Like, I would still hope that I could create art that would on some level resonate with them. I don't want to cut anyone off.
No, I think Tacos does have some. I mean, I'm not like totally up to date on who reads him or whatever, but there's a sense in which I get the sense that there's people who read him who don't read any of the other red pill stuff at all, but they see the value there.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I like too. Is like, when you reach that human level of relating to someone, I find that it's easier to disagree with them, or easier to say, okay, on this area, I definitely don't follow you there, but I still know that your heart's in the right place, and I'm still going to support what you're doing.
Yeah. Though our pod is named The New Right, our mission statement from the very beginning is to profile, real art that is outside of the mainstream.
Right.
And, that means, in my opinion, and I think in Matt's opinion as well, art that is, art first and foremost, and the political agenda kind of serves the art.
Right.
And that is that's from all sides. That's from, art. Good art should touch everyone in a no homo.
Well, I almost think that we live in a time where just attempting to do that places you on the right, not in some strict way, but just by association.
Which is why we're the new right.
Right. That's where I find myself, and it isn't through hardline identification or adherence to a specific doctrine, but it's from merely wanting enough distance and enough space to create something authentic and it's true to my actual experience. That's enough to almost get you labeled as a dissident or to place you in dissident territory. But I don't want to cause confusion. I'm not a banner carrying kind of guy. I'm not a programmatic person like that.
Yeah, neither am I. I don't find it. I've been on sort of right-wing Twitter for a number of years, and I guess I've tried things on for size to an extent, but I'm at a point where it's like, no, carrying that banner does absolutely nothing to serve me.
No.
Being honest and interacting with people does a lot to serve me. But, and there's a place in the world
and rather to serve your art.
Right, to serve my art, my creativity. I mean, there's a place in the world for banner holders and for ideologues and for thought leaders, but it's not something that I'm that interested in.
I mean, that's fair enough. Probably there is a place for that, but that's not who I am.
Yeah. Just one thing I want to say about this is maybe it's a cringe sort of boomer or like Gen X-y sort of thing, but I'm reminded what is this quote? I don't know who said it. The people who first heard the Velvet Underground were all inspired to start their own band. I think that Tacos has played that role for a lot of us. And I can say again, I haven't read that much of your blog. It's in that Delicious Tacos form.
Yes.
But content-wise, setting-wise, I think you're fine. I don't think there's anything remotely derivative about it. And I think that it's a powerful. It's a good medium. That sort of and Tacos is open about what the way he writes is up. You just sit down and you write about your life as honest as you can. I see that in your work. It's something that I'm trying to write too, and whether or not a lot of it's stuff I just keep private. Whether it's my day-to-day journaling, but to bring a conversation back to like what the first topic we touched on, which was like the habit of writing and the ritual. I mean, you're not going to have a fiction story to work on every day, and that's what I find. The sort of not to give him too much credit because it's not like he invented journaling, but what could kind of be thought of as almost like the Delicious Tacos form of just that kind of writing. You have to be able to do that some days. I think.
No, that's true, and it's almost a relief, or it's a valve for escaping the pressure of thinking like I have to elaborate on this fictional world every day. Well, I don't feel like it, but I can always write about some bullshit that's going on in my personal life.
And it's so therapeutic, and not to sound like a lib, but it's so therapeutic and pleasurable to write about that stuff.
It is.
You can feel it just melting off your chest if it's something difficult. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, if you go far,
it keeps the mind limber.
Yeah, it does.
The muscles,
That's right. Yeah, the verbal intelligence operating at maximum capacity. Yeah, if you read more of the blog, you'll see I've written about some. I'm a little shameless. I'm balls out, really, when it comes down to it. I mean, not in every piece, but if you look over time, I've written about some shit. I write under my own name. My image is out there, and that's a little bit of the that's like the performance artist aspect of it as well, where I, at least according to my own perspective, have taken some risks. Like in the last piece I wrote, one of the points I was making is that like if certain people read some of the shit that I've written, my life would be much more uncomfortable. But I'm on the internet and no one cares.
Right.
And
it's kind of what you're saying earlier. No one actually cares.
Yeah, right.
When you start to realize more and more.
But if the wrong person at the wrong time took a look at something, they could cause trouble for me.
Right.
If they wanted to. I write under my name. I've written about some really embarrassing things. I'm a little shameless when it comes to that, but I hope it's to bridge certain gaps. I do.
Oh no, that was what drew me in. I think the line I was like when the first this thing you posted like a week ago, where you're writing about Cormac McCarthy's first novel, and the last sentence of your paragraph is like, I wrote a novel at the same age, and it's better than Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this guy, whether or not that's true, but like, because I haven't read the Cormac McCarthy novel, but like. So being willing to say that and being, and I don't know, is that your ultimate take? Maybe you could see both ways, but that emotional truth of my fucking novel's better than this.
Yes.
I was like, I can relate to this. This is good. I'm gonna read this.
It's about working through that. It's about letting people see that raw experience of like this is what I actually go through. This is part of how I feel, at least at times. And to finish up, I guess on like what's next. I think I want to do a nonfiction collection. I'm working on a short story collection as well because I've written a lot of short stories, and some of those are on the blog as well. Quite a few of them, but I have others that I'm finishing up and I've edited. I submitted a short story. Are you familiar with the Passenger Prize?
Oh yeah,
Passage Prize. Yeah,
Passage Prize. Yeah, right.
We love it.
Yeah,
Gomez and Zero HP.
Yeah, I submitted a short story to that I think it's pretty good. Most of the excerpts I've seen, of course, I've been pretty egocentric with that. And you can't really tell what's going on with an excerpt, but I usually end up thinking like, I think I'm better than that. But who knows? People have their own standards. I don't know exactly what he's looking for, but I would like to at least clear the bar on that and get. I don't expect to win, but it'd be nice to get some recognition, like a nod.
I think I saw this morning that there's talk that like the honorable mentions or even just that somehow or other their other work is going to be
an honorable mention would really be fantastic. Who really knows? And
regardless of whatever happens there, you wrote a really good novel. Like The Neighbor. I mean, Matt and I have spent like the past year reading lots of novels, and like this is really good. And
I appreciate that.
The writing, when you say like similar stylistically to Tacos, I see a little bit of that, but honestly, this is all your own. And like a lot of the turns of phrase and stuff is, stuff I haven't really read before.
Sure, I mean it is homegrown and it's honed over time too. It's both organic experience, but it's a lot of craft too. And I'm glad that it's hitting that way. That really makes me feel good. I mean, I would hope, like I want to. It's nice to have a hobby, I guess, and to have some way of occupying my time that isn't just watching television. But it would also suck if I really sucked. Like if nobody thought anything I was doing was any good. It's like it is nice. Like I think there is something to be said for getting positive feedback, and even if it's like constructive criticism, but it does help. Like who knows? Maybe I would just give up if everyone thought everything I did was terrible. I don't know that I can really be one of those people that says like I would just always do whatever I wanted, no matter what happened.
Yeah.
Probably not.
You do not have to worry about that because you got some really good lines in here and, a really good story.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I do appreciate
that. It seems like their good reviews keep rolling in on Amazon as well.
Yeah.
great.
And it's nice to get a mix. I've had people in my real life that have bought the book and they've reviewed it. It's good to hear from them on that. But the most satisfying thing is hearing from totally anonymous people, because there's no connection there. Even if there probably isn't really pressure, but I can always think that if I give a book to somebody that I know, maybe they feel a little bit pressured to be positive, or even not just to be positive, like maybe they really do like it, but just pressure to like, oh, I need to read this. But if it's somebody from who the fuck knows where, it could be anywhere in the world, who found it through whatever channel and still felt compelled to read it, review it, that's a very encouraging thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we sincerely...
really is something for everyone in there, because it's like my novel, Matt's novel, I know that certain people reading it would be like, I'm offended. I think I need to stop reading this if I want to remain a member in good standing of society or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But your novel, it's maybe, I see why it's difficult to publish in the mainstream publishing industry, but it really is something that, I think anyone could read and enjoy.
Yeah, I was not trying to offend, while at the same time not trying to placate or cash in on trends or sensitivities either. So on either end, wasn't trying to provoke or soothe.
I was just gonna say I sincerely hope some people who listen to our podcast buy your book, and we'll definitely put the link out there. If we can help you get to a bigger audience, that's what we want to do. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, no, that would be great, and that's part of why. I enjoy these discussions anyway, just for their own sake. It's fun, but that would be a fantastic byproduct.
Yeah.
Just to repeat it is The Neighbor by Caleb Caudell, and your blog is middleamericanlit.wordpress.com. And everyone should check it out. It's great writing.
For sure.
Thank you.
I think that's maybe a wrap, guys.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
I had one thing I was going to ask that doesn't have to be for the podcast, because it's totally off topic, but it's just something that I thought of this morning when I was reading your blog. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't resonate, you can disregard it. And we probably won't put in this podcast because it's not thematically on point. But you mentioned listening to Bury Your Dead, and I think it was some other band.
Misery Signals.
I just was I had this in my back pocket to whip out if there was like a dead spell and we had another topic to move on to. I used to listen to that. I don't know what you call it, metalcore or
metalcore.
Like hardcore.
Sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I used to listen to that a lot when I was a teenager, and like over this past year or so, have gotten back into it. And one of the things I find kind of interesting about it is that like so many of those bands are from the Midwest and from like second tier.
Milwaukee, Chicago,
yeah. Or even if they're from like the Northeast, it's like some random city in Massachusetts.
Yeah, right. It's like Podunk area, and Worcester, Massachusetts.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. So like I've been getting back. I mean, just sincerely getting back to music. I think it's better than I'd given it credit after I sort of moved out of that phase.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I just was kind of curious if like that resonated at all. Where like there's something very Midwestern and like sort of old school. Not old school is the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, that stuff is always going to be. It's always going to have a place in my heart, and I'll go for long periods of time without listening to it, but I can always go back to it. And of course, it's formative, right? You listen to it in a period of your adolescence when your emotions are especially intense, and you identify it with it in an especially vivid way. And those impressions, I think, they're indelible. They're with you forever, no matter what. So I can always go back to that. And like the metal stuff too. I think I described it somewhat self-deprecatingly or ironically, like I'm a melancholic meathead. So it's like these two tendencies of where like I think about things, I get very pensive and wistful, but also like I just have like this masculine aggression where like I want to kick the shit out of someone.
That is that's a really good point. Yeah, metalcore, especially even like post-hardcore and even some like better emo.
Yeah.
Especially compared to just like the floofy shit.
Yeah.
Rock and roll is dead. Mm-hmm. Like I go back to it, it's like this so perfectly captures like it's like it's masculine music, but also like with a sensitive side.
Yeah, right. It does.
It's good stuff.
It marries those sides of me where like half the time I want to fight someone, and then the other half I want to cry, but they're both very real.
Yeah, they are, and there's such a lack, I find, of that kind of masculinity in general, but even that kind of like just like white guy from the Midwest.
Yeah, right.
It used to be in the culture with music like that, but yeah, going back to that music, I always find like that nostalgia for the presence of that as like an influencing force in culture.
Well, I almost think
I think it comes in your writing too, so that's why I brought it up. But yeah,
I almost think old school country used to express that, right? The fact that
I think so.
I'm a hard ass, but actually I'm crying into my beer too, and like the bitch left me, and actually I'm torn up about it, but also I'm going to kick your ass if you look at me the wrong way.
Right.
That used to be.
I think you're right. Yeah, there is like when metalcore was popular. It was no one would have ever thought like there's something sort of analogous to country music going on here, but I think like in hindsight, it reminds me of that.
That's
like
right. In the rearview, you can see it especially, but that's hard to express, and I think that's hard for people to understand. Maybe for women or like men who are raised a certain way, how men can contain those seemingly contrary emotions or impulses, like. But for me, it's very strong, and it's powerful, and sometimes I don't know how to reconcile things. But yeah, in writing too, I hope to be doing my own version of it, where
I think so. Yeah,
I am extremely wistful. I am very sad about certain things. Like my heart breaks very easily over seemingly minor incidents and events, but also like I don't know, I have a lot of rage and hatred, and I want to hurt people too. Like,
you want to process those emotions in a masculine way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think there is something really virile about that aesthetic that I like to try and bring it to my writing as well. But yeah, it's interesting because like metalcore gets kind of maligned or like people dismiss it, but I think
no, there's more.
There's a lot more to it, and hopefully there'll be and this does happen with genres. Like hopefully give it another few years and people will have a better regard for it.
Right. I was always partial to. I like some of the more simplistic stuff, like some of the really just simplistic beat down stuff that can be fun, like party stuff, but I was always partial to the stuff that was a little more complex, that blended more of the intricate melodies, like the shimmering reflective guitar tones and phrasings with those complex, like the polyrhythmic breakdowns.
Yeah, I like Norma Jean's first album.
Yeah. Early Norma Jean is great. Yeah. Some of that stuff does get played out a little bit.
Oh, yeah, definitely like a little bit of that aesthetic got played out, but like, yeah. And wouldn't bring up Norma Jean, there's a whole other interesting element where there was that whole like Christian
there's a lot of
scene, which
there's a lot of overlap there too, and especially in the Midwest and Indiana, a lot of those bands were Christian. Like especially Indianapolis had like a Christian metalcore scene.
Yeah. I think it's like kind of fascinating the extent to which that existed and how those bands were not some niche thing where it was only Christian youth groups listening to, but like at Hot Topic and The Devil Wears Prada next to My Chemical Romance. Like it's all that the way that seeped into the culture is I don't think it's like adequately appreciated how sort of interesting that was.
I think there is a cultural history that still needs to be written about quite a bit of that. And I have a friend who lives in Chicago who grew up in the same scene, and he's a free jazz drummer, but he got his chops playing like metalcore, hardcore, a lot of that same stuff. And we've talked about how somebody needs to sit down and really do like a comprehensive, exhaustive cultural history of that kind of stuff. Yeah,
and I think it's kind of ignored for the reason we were talking about, which is that it's kind of like a flyover country phenomenon. I think that's part of why it's not
flyover. It's like retrograde masculinity, but still with some of those maybe slightly more sensitive or feminine elements as well. It's difficult to categorize. It's difficult to place, but it says a lot about where a lot of people were at the time.